Yeah, a lot of people think that the apology is the finish line when it comes to conflict. Hey, I already apologized. We should be good now. But what is sometimes missing that makes it feel as though the conflict isn't really fully resolved is the connection piece.
Yeah.
The connection piece at the end. Yeah, the apology happened, but I'm not sure if you truly understand what I went through enough for it not to be repeated.
Yeah.
For you to understand me next time, for some effort to try to connect with me and really try to understand why I got upset in the first place.
Hello, and welcome to a Purpose-Driven Marriage podcast. We are Dwayne and Nadine Stewart, and we love any and all things marriage. You've tuned into the right place if you're looking for actionable, practical tips to help you overcome real-life obstacles common to real relationships. We're here to help you strive for a marriage as God has designed it and not as the world has defined it. Because why settle for a good marriage when you can have a great one?
So I'm really excited. We are starting a communication series.
Why are we talking about communication, Nadine? Doesn't everybody know about how to communicate with each other?
If they did, it wouldn't be such a hot topic. It wouldn't be one of the top Google searches when it comes to relationships.
Okay.
It would not.
That's probably me doing
That's
that.
you. No, honestly, babe, I think I've shared this with you before, but I would say close to 100% of the people that contact me for help with their marriage or their relationship mention communication as one of the issues they're dealing with.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, I hear that from you all the time. We've read books that talk about communication, and even us, whenever we have disagreements and conflicts about communication. So I'm like, okay, does make a lot of sense that this is something that people struggle with. And I think some of the things that we've learned and we've read and we practice ourselves, I think hopefully help some people that are listening today. Yeah.
I hope so too. And, here's just a little tidbit, right? That a lot of people don't realize. People call me and they say that we're having communication issues, but 9 times out of 10, it's actually not communication issues they're dealing with. It seems like it's communication issues because every time they have a conversation, it ends in a fight.
Yes.
Right? That there's all sorts of conflict happening and they don't know how to heal from it. But oftentimes, the communication issues are actually a byproduct of connection issues.
Yeah.
And so when people can fix their lack of connection or the breakdown of their connection, it often makes communicating with one another a lot easier.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't have as much tension. It's easier to try to see each other's perspective because they're connected. And so in this series, as we teach communication skills and these tools, what we'll actually be demonstrating as well is how to connect as a couple, how to fix whatever's been broken in that area of the relationship.
I think really the challenge is that people know. Somebody calls you and they say, oh, we're having trouble communicating, the husband or the wife or whatever, but they don't really know why they're having communication problems or where to start.
Yeah.
Like I know there's problems here. And, it's almost like we're speaking two different languages. Okay, I get it. But I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And like, where is the issue and how do we fix it? And I think that's kind of the main thing is really just helping to break down, like from this big complicated issue, go in and break it down to something very small so we can say, I can understand that. Let's start there and then broaden it from that point.
You set that up so well because today's topic is from conflict to connection, how to heal after a fight.
Yeah.
And so that was teed up so well.
I think everybody wants to get to the healing after the fight. We just have to figure out how to get there. Yeah, that's right. So let's get started. Yeah. Let's talk about how to go from conflict to connection, right? And a lot of people don't like the word conflict. They don't like the word conflict. Why do you think that is? Well, they think conflict is bad. They think conflict is a sign of their marriage not doing well.
Yeah.
Most people think that if you fight a lot, that means you have a bad relationship and you're on the brink of either divorce if you're married, or you're on the brink of breaking up if you're dating. But that's not really the issue. Conflict is going to happen. I mean, the Bible talks about that, right? It's very clear that we as individuals are going to be at war or against each other just because that's part of our nature. In James 4:1, it says that what causes quarrels, what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? And so when you really think about everybody's individual passions, we're all selfish. We're all selfish. We don't want to admit it, but we're selfish, right?
Yeah.
We all want to be pleased. We all want to be happy. We all want the things that we want. And that's the challenge, is that everybody has an individual need to win. And I think our nature is not to look at the other person's need and try to fulfill that first.
Yeah.
So that's where we get to where we are right now.
Yeah. Well, a lot of conflict comes from unmet expectations.
Definitely.
Yeah, but many times those expectations are not communicated.
That's 100%.
Yep. But a lot of people also think that peace is what they're seeking in their marriage, and that peace must be the absence of conflict. But how do you connect if you don't get to know the innermost need of the other person, right? Yeah. That usually ends up resulting in the conflict in the first place. And so what I tell people is, don't run away from conflict. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
It is not a matter of if, but when.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you've been married 5 months or 50 years, conflict will happen in the relationship. And so what you do with conflict is you use it as an opportunity to create connection between you. When you truly take the time to understand what that need was, what that expectation was that went unmet, it helps you to connect.
Yeah. Because now you're growing. You're actually growing. Learning something that you did not know about your spouse. That now that you know it, your relationship is going to blossom and it's going to be better from here on out because of the knowledge that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but it helps to build trust.
Yeah.
If I know that you're taking the time to understand why I was so upset, to understand where that conflict originated from, it helps me to trust you.
Yes.
It helps me to build that trust for future situations, because you have taken the time to be vulnerable with me, and vulnerability breeds trust in relationships.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, that's another topic, but I agree.
You agree.
That vulnerability does breed trust. Vulnerability is sometimes the hard part to get to, but that's another thing.
So how do we go from conflict to connection? How can people heal after a fight? We've had some of those fights before where even after the other person has apologized, it still seems like it's too soon for it to go away.
Yeah.
Right? Like it seems to linger.
You know what? We don't have these that often, but we had something like that. I think it was probably 2 weeks ago. And man, we kind of go through the whole thing and, asking questions. And I was like, okay, I feel like we're in a good place. Went to sleep, woke up, and you were still cold. I was like, what is going on here? I thought we resolved this whole thing. But there was still meat on the bone, I would say. And I think there are some steps that we need to take in order to really find out, okay, maybe we did not get to the really core issue that we were dealing with. Like, what is it? And I think that was the part that I was missing because I didn't ask that next question.
Yeah, a lot of people think that the apology is the finish line when it comes to conflict. Hey, I already apologized. We should be good now. But what is sometimes missing that makes it feel as though the conflict isn't really fully resolved is the connection piece.
Yeah.
The connection piece at the end. Yeah, the apology happened, but I'm not sure if you truly understand what I went through enough for it not to be repeated.
Yeah.
For you to understand me next time. For some effort to try to connect with me and really try to understand why I got upset in the first place. Right. And so oftentimes when couples go through conflict and one person has apologized and they're thinking, okay, well, we should be done with this. Let's move on. It should be resolved. But the other person still feels some sort of way. It is usually because the connection has not been reinstated.
Yeah.
Is that the right word? Like,
I have a different word or term that I'm thinking about.
What is it?
I'm just thinking that, so here's what I'm thinking. The conflict happens. The discussion about the conflict happens. Okay. Everything's all good. We figured out what the solution is. And then there's an apology and it's like, okay, here's what we'll do moving forward. There has to be a trust.
Yes.
That, okay, well, you're going to follow through on that thing that you just said I'm going to do. And for whatever reason, whether that has happened multiple times before and not followed through upon, there's still a lingering, I don't know if you really understand that this is what you need to do or this is what I'm expecting because you said it before and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think that's where the connection is. It's like, okay, you said that 2 or 3, 4 times before that, and it didn't happen. We're having the same conflict, the same issue that we had before. So how is that going to change? And I think that's the connection piece that's missing. And once you make that connection, that's where the resolution happens and everything is moving forward. But still, there needs to be a follow through. At that point, the apology, okay, this is what I understand. Okay, this is what we do moving forward. And then the moving forward happens, right? And then once you move forward, you still have to see the fruits of what you had talked about as the resolution of the issue.
Oh, I love that. That was a great explanation. Oh, that was good. So let's talk about this then. There are some steps that couples can go through. So let's say they get into a fight and then they finally decide to sit down together to try to resolve this, to try to talk about what's going on, talk about what the conflict is that they're dealing with, right? So we have 5 steps to help you guys go from conflict to connecting again and healing after you've found yourself in a situation where you're fighting, which is something that every couple, no matter how long you've been together, no matter if you're novices or you're absolute experts in relationships, every couple goes through conflict.
And you know what? I'm going to say something. There are no experts.
There are no experts.
There are people that may know how to handle the resolution, but I don't think they're experts because we're all human. The human side always comes into play. People can say, oh, well, you're experts. I'm not an expert. Okay. You know what I mean? This stuff happens and I'm like, sometimes I just want to be selfish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you're like, dang it. I understand. Like, I get it.
Well, you just don't want to be called an expert because then I'll say, hey, Dwayne, don't you know better?
And I'll say, yeah, I do know better. But that still doesn't mean I just shy away from the word expert. That's all. Enough off that topic.
Okay, so let's go conflict to connection, how to heal after a fight. First of all, it's really important that you guys acknowledge that there's conflict happening and make space and make time for you to sit down and talk about this. So that means it's a time when the kids are in bed or not there. If you have to leave the house and get a babysitter so you guys can sit in the car or sit at a park or sit somewhere.
I mean, if it's going to take that long. I mean, some conflicts, it doesn't take long to resolve.
Yeah, but the whole point is, out of respect for your relationship, because your relationship's so important, try to do this in a way where you can give each other undivided attention. Because if you've got kids crawling all over you and screaming and whatever, then you're not going to give your relationship the attention that it deserves. And what will end up happening is that will actually add to the resentment. Right? Because you don't feel heard. You don't feel like your partner is taking the time to really try to understand you.
It's the same thing as when you meet with clients, right? I mean, when they're on a Zoom meeting and they have like 2 little ones and they're crawling over them and, giving them bottles and one is screaming and there's a dog in the background, you're like, okay, there's no way you're going to be able to focus on this, as opposed to them being in your office and having undivided attention. So I do understand that. That makes sense.
So when you guys are sitting down together, you've set aside the time to have the conversation. The first step is in sharing how you felt. And it's really important that the person that's sharing first says it in a way that doesn't come across as criticism. Right. So rather than saying, you said this and it made me feel badly, saying it from the perspective of your own feelings. Like, so I felt this way.
Yeah. Instead of you
when
did
this happened. Exactly. I felt, and then you say whatever it is. I felt defensive. I felt overwhelmed with emotion.
You do this so that your spouse does not feel defensive, right? Because if you say, I felt this way, not you made me feel this way, it elicits a different feeling. It's like, okay, well, if you felt that way, maybe I should understand better why you felt that way or what caused you to feel in that way.
Yeah. So, I think I mentioned that we have those feelings word lists that people can choose from, because oftentimes we get stuck with the same 3, 4, or 5 feelings.
Sometimes there's something better to describe how you feel. Because the key is that you want to be able to describe it in a way where your partner understands, and then they can say, oh, okay.
Yeah,
because,
I get that. I felt sad is kind of broad.
You have to dig deeper into that.
Yeah, exactly. But if you say I felt really vulnerable at that party, I felt totally flooded.
Right.
I felt I had no idea what I was feeling. Maybe it's that.
That's why you were flooded.
Yeah, that's why I was flooded. Or I felt both of us were partly right.
You never say that, Nadine.
We're partly right.
No.
So we've got all sorts of different things that we can use to describe how we felt. But the first step is taking the time to share with your spouse how you were feeling. And then step 2 is dealing with your realities. So here's the way I describe this with my clients. I tell people that you describe your own reality as your perception. So imagine you and your spouse were witnesses to the same traffic accident, but he's on one corner and you're at another corner, and the two of you are being interviewed by the police officer. So you guys are describing it from your perspective, your vantage point, from where you were standing and what you saw. So you guys take turns describing your perceptions, your own reality of what happened during the incident. And you describe only what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, not what you think your partner or your spouse meant or felt, right? So you're not attacking the other person. You're not blaming the other person. You might say something like, I heard you say,
right?
Because that's your perception rather than you said this, right? Well, what I heard you say is this,
right?
Because that leaves room for your spouse to correct anything that you may have misheard or misunderstood later in the conversation.
Right. Basically trying to repeat the kind of a play-by-play of what happened and how you felt based on the series of events.
Exactly. So here's an example. Like, let's say we were at a party, and maybe it's your company party, right? And you brought me along with you. And later that evening, I'm upset. And you're trying to figure out why I'm upset. Yeah. And so we're experiencing conflict. We sit down, we talk about it. And I might say, I heard you say you were going to go and talk to one of your coworkers, but that you'd be right back. But you never returned. So I stood there stuck in a conversation with some people I don't know. Yeah. And I didn't know what to do. Yeah. I felt so abandoned. Right. By the way, that's a
real thing.
That's a very real thing that happens. That hasn't happened to us, but that's a very real thing. In fact,
but I would leave you.
You would leave me?
I definitely would, for sure, because you would have no problem talking to just random people. But if you felt abandoned, I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. It was my bad. I should have came back. Like, I looked over and it looked like you were having fun, but you probably were just trying to be nice to people instead. And, I should have come back to get you.
Yeah, well, that's not how we're going to demonstrate how to do this step by step for everyone, because we miss a few steps there. right? So I am sharing my reality, what I experienced. I felt abandoned, right? And you would then summarize and validate my reality.
Yeah.
So if I told you that I felt abandoned and I heard you tell me that you were just going to go talk to a coworker, but then you never returned, and I end up being stuck there talking to some people I didn't know, like, how would you then validate that?
Yeah. What I would say is, wow, you know what? You're right. I can't imagine how you felt in that situation, knowing that you were waiting for me to come back and I never came back. You know what I mean? And you must have felt very abandoned. You must have felt kind of betrayed and kind of alone, right? Because now you're talking to people that you don't know, and you're probably in a situation that you want to get out of, and you're waiting for me to get you out of it. So I totally understand that. I would probably feel the same way if I was in that situation.
Yeah, that was great, babe.
Yeah.
And so basically what you're doing is you're summarizing and then you're validating, right? Yeah. So you could say something like, it makes sense to me now why you saw it that way. Right. And then you use empathy by, I can see why this upset you. And by the way, a little side note, empathy. A lot of people don't know what empathy truly means in a relationship. They think that empathy is, if I were in your shoes, is what I would do. Let me see how I would feel if I were you.
Right.
But that's not true empathy. You know why?
Why?
Because it's still you.
Yeah.
It's still you with your biases, with your personality, with your whatever it might be. How many times are we like, oh, if I were that person, I'd do this. Well, that's not practicing empathy because you're not that person. You don't know their experiences. You don't know their triggers. You don't know any of those things. And so, of course, you would probably respond differently. True empathy is you imagining yourself as that person.
Yeah, and then feeling what the feelings that they felt.
Exactly.
In that moment.
Exactly. And this is one of the reasons why being so connected with your spouse, like really understanding who they are, what their pain points are, their past, those types of things, why it's so beneficial, because then you could practice real empathy. And maybe in that situation, maybe you knew that I have a fear of abandonment. Maybe I was abandoned as a child. Maybe I got lost at Costco.
I was just thinking that. That's so funny. I was like, you got lost at a department store, didn't you?
Yeah, something like that. And because
you were
of
playing
that,
around in that little circle where all the clothes are, and you popped out and your parents were gone. That's what happened.
So that's what empathy is, right? It's understanding that and then validating your spouse's feelings based on what you understand. And by the way, validation doesn't mean you agree. You are not telling me, oh yeah, that's exactly what I did. I abandoned you. Right? Because you may have a story behind it. Like what I thought I heard may not actually be accurate.
Right.
I may have heard something completely different. You may have said, hey, my boss called a quick meeting or whatever it is.
And I had to,
and so we were there huddled together, and it looked like we were having conversations, but we actually had an emergency meeting.
Right. Or somebody was telling me their deepest, darkest secrets.
Which they shouldn't.
And I couldn't break away. And I was like, I wanted to come get you, but I couldn't. My bad. I'm sorry. By the way, I think in every single step, there is a moment where you can get defensive. In this one as well. Like when your spouse comes up to you and says, I can't believe you did that. You know, and then you could get defensive and say, you know, something like, you fine, you know what I mean? Or whatever. That's always a possibility, but it's the wrong move. Because for me, it's the first feeling that I get sometimes, but I know that's not going to lead to a good resolution of this issue. It's going to be better for all of us if empathy is the first reaction that you have instead of defensiveness.
Yes, that's so key. I mean, that will make you that expert that you don't want to be. Yeah, if you could practice empathy first before defensiveness, you will be golden. So after we do the summarizing and validating of your spouse's feelings, then you ask, did I get it? Like, did I understand how you were feeling? Is there anything else that I need to know to understand? And if I tell you, yeah, you absolutely got it and we're good, then we're done. We move on. Right. We move on. But if, let's say, like that example that you gave about a couple weeks ago, you thought that you had validated already. You thought that you summarized it, you validated my feelings, and you're like, all right, cool, we're done. But yet I still did not seem ready to move on. At that point, we ask, okay, what do I need to know?
Yeah.
What else do I need to understand your perspective?
Did I miss? Like, what am I missing here that
exactly
I don't understand that you're still feeling that we didn't resolve yet?
Yep, exactly. And if there's anything else, then you kind of start over with whatever that is. Like you talk about the feelings, you summarize and you validate it, you practice empathy. And then you keep doing that until you get to a point where you both feel understood.
Yeah.
And so now most couples will stop here.
Yeah.
Most couples will stop here, but it's not what leads to connection. What leads to connection and where that trust building thing is that you were talking about earlier is when you take it one step further.
Yeah.
And this is when you try to understand the need behind the need. So this is where you try to understand your spouse's triggers. Like, what is it that made your spouse feel the way that they felt, right? And this is when you take the time to say, what happened? Like, why do you think you felt the way that you felt? Right? Share with me, what is it that triggered that?
So I feel like this is, so after you've kind of done everything and now you've resolved it. So everything's good at this
Everything's
point.
good.
Everything's like, hey, we're good.
It's where most people will stop. They're like, all right, cool, we resolved it. Let's high five.
This is a moment of reflection. I'm thinking about this in my mind and saying, okay, why did she respond to the situation in that way? Because I don't think I would, but since you did, there was something else going on that caused you to feel that way. And so now you have a clarifying moment where I would now ask, hey, you know what? I'm just very curious to understand what caused you to feel that. Like, what is there another trigger? Is there something else that happened in your past that made you feel that makes you feel abandoned in moments like that?
And you know what that does is this is where the trust building begins to happen, because what you are then asking me to do is show vulnerability, right? And you're creating this safe space for me to be able to be vulnerable with you. And so that right there, by you asking me that question and allowing me to tap into my memory, which we often protect, right? These triggers, we try to protect them because they don't always feel good when we experience them. And so the fact that you're giving me that safe space to be able to talk about it, and you're asking me to dig and, and be vulnerable, that right there is what's building the connection. And so on my end, I guess, what we would do is we would go back and just kind of rewind our memory, right? In our database, and stop at a point where we feel like we had maybe a similar situation, a similar set of feelings triggered in the past. And then we tell that story. And maybe it is, I got left at a department store and I was really scared and I felt so alone and didn't know what to do. And so anytime that happens to me, it makes me feel abandoned. It makes me feel whatever the feelings are. And I would then continue to tell that story until you understand.
Yeah. And then I would make sure that I don't put you in situations that would cause you to feel that way.
Exactly.
Right? Because I know what's going to happen. The feelings that you feel from those instances and things like that, then you say, all right, well, I know those triggers, so I need to make sure and protect you from having to feel those things.
Exactly. And you actually kind of segued into the final step, which is taking that responsibility. It's basically just saying, what is it that set you up for the miscommunication? What is it that set you up for the conflict in the first place? And so taking responsibility is sharing how you set yourself up to get into this conflict. I'd been very stressed and irritable lately, or I haven't really been paying attention to you the way that I should lately. And
I've been distracted.
And then following that up with specifically, what do you regret about that? Right. And so saying, okay, Right? I'm so sorry I overlooked things, or I didn't pay attention to you, or whatever it is specifically that was your contribution.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how you take responsibility. And this is when you are expressing what it is that you wish to apologize for.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you accept the apology, say so.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let them know. Mm-hmm. Say, you know what? Thank you so much for saying that. I definitely accept your apology.
Yeah.
Right?
I can tell you something too.
What?
Just one thing, because I think we all have a tendency to want to skip to the end in some ways. And so acknowledging responsibility, I think, especially for guys, like, mm-hmm. You see all these videos, TikToks and stuff, and says, happy wife, happy life, and all those different mm-hmm. things that are said. And it says, hey, you know what? Regardless, the best way to end an argument is to say, I'm sorry, and to take responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And say you do that, and you do that for a while. But then there's a time where your wife says, I'm not buying it anymore. Right. It is important to take responsibility. Mm-hmm. It is important to acknowledge that you had a part in the conflict, but you can't take responsibility for something that you don't understand.
Yep.
And well, you can, and it could be false. Mm-hmm. Right. But then the situation will come up again. So us as men would have a tendency to skip those other portions of it,
the other steps.
Understanding the triggers, and then the first step and the second step, and mm-hmm. get to the fifth step and acknowledge responsibility for something that they really don't understand. And if you don't understand it, then you're not going to be able to prevent it from happening in the future.
Happening
right? Again. So that piece I think is really important, but the other pieces are even more important because you want to be true. Mm-hmm. You want to be accurate, and you don't want this to come up again.
That's actually a really great explanation. Mm-hmm. Basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that a lot of spouses, whether mm-hmm. it's the husband or the wife, like to go from conflict, saying, hey, I felt this way, and then they go to the apology.
Yep.
Right? Okay, fine. I take responsibility. My
mm-hmm.
bad. I won't do that again.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't really taken the time to fully understand what it is
yep.
that they're even doing again,
yep.
or why mm-hmm. their spouse felt the way that they did.
Right.
Right? Because they didn't take the time to validate. They didn't take the time to even summarize how their spouse is feeling. Mm-hmm. They didn't take the time to understand how they got here.
Yeah.
What are those triggers so you're not repeating it?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to go from, hey, I felt this way, to, okay, fine, you know, I get it. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do it again.
And it might sound good. It
mm-hmm.
might sound, okay, so he understands. Okay. Or she understands. That's awesome. I'm really happy about that. Okay. Kiss, make up, and we move on. Mm-hmm. But then if it happens again, then it's like, well, maybe you didn't understand. Like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? So now you have to kind of start from step one and then continue through the process until you really and truly understand what the issue is. And then you get to that honest mm-hmm. point where you acknowledge the responsibility mm-hmm. of whatever happened, and you can truly now do a 180 and then avoid that situation, or do your absolute best to make sure that conflict doesn't happen again, because now you really understand why it all happened in the first place.
Well, you know what you're depriving yourselves of when you go from step 1 to step 5 without doing the steps in between? The chance for connection.
Yeah. You're
not getting to connect. All mm-hmm. you're experiencing is conflict.
Yeah.
And then you become that couple that, is like, oh, we have communication issues mm-hmm. because all we do is fight.
Right.
But imagine if when you do fight, when you do experience conflict, you end connecting mm-hmm. with each other. It won't feel like you have communication issues because you actually took the time to connect with one another.
Right.
And so you don't feel like it's just one conflict after another. Mm-hmm. It's actually an opportunity that you guys are taking to grow.
Yeah.
So the final step 5, is making constructive plans.
Yeah.
So what is it that either your spouse can do or the two of you can do together so that you avoid the situation in the future?
And so basically all that is your spouse thinking about you in all situations. And what I mean by that is, like, don't just be thinking about yourself when you make a decision. Think about how that decision can affect your spouse. So, if you're driving home and you decide to play golf, I'm just going to go to the range for a little bit and be like, oh, it's only like 30 minutes. But then how does that affect your spouse? You know what I mean? And so that might cause a conflict that you weren't really expecting. But you also have to be thinking about your significant other and how your decisions are going to affect them.
100%. So let's summarize our 5 steps.
Summary.
So again, this is if you and your spouse were to get into, the regular everyday fights that couples go through, their usual stuff. They're not the big life-changing conflict, but more so just the stuff that couples go through, regular stuff, right? Whatever it might be. So how can we take that conflict and turn it into an opportunity to connect and heal, right? Heal after a fight. So step 1 is sharing your feelings, right? Step 2 is describing your reality, your perception of the situation, taking turns and doing that. And then the listener takes the time to summarize what they think their spouse said and validate it.
Yes.
At least validate your partner's reality. And number 3, this is the part where the connection begins to happen, right?
But this is the part where typically gets skipped.
A lot of people skip this part. This is where you're sharing what experiences or memories you've had that might have escalated the interaction.
Yeah.
Right? The stories of why these are triggers for you, for each of you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's one of those situations, like our example was more about me, but sometimes the conflict that happens is really just seeing the same situation differently.
Yeah.
Right? Feeling differently about, maybe it's parenting. One of you wants to parent one way, the other person wants to parent another way. Maybe it's finances.
Yeah.
Maybe it is dealing with the in-laws, right? Maybe it could be a number of different things, but it is a situation where you guys don't see eye to eye. So giving yourselves the opportunity to take turns describing your own perception of the situation, your own reality, and then sharing what experiences or memories that you have that might be a trigger for you, that causes an escalation with this particular topic. And then number 4 is acknowledging your own role, right? And contributing to the fight or the incident.
Yeah.
So taking that responsibility.
This is the part where I said people like to skip to the end, not knowing the middle portion of it, what caused it to happen.
Exactly. They don't know their spouse's perception of what happened. They haven't validated. They don't understand the triggers behind it. And so they want to skip to taking responsibility just to end the fight, really is what it is. But then they end up going through the same fight all over again.
Yeah.
And so then the last one is planning together a way that each of you can make it better next time.
Yeah.
Right? How do you try to avoid the situation next time?
I feel like that's the best part too, because it's like, okay, we've gotten past this. This is awesome. I appreciate us kind of walking through it. Now, how do we avoid this from happening in the future? Like, let's talk through it a little bit and work together, right?
Yeah.
Work together to make sure that we are aligned. And as we know, if we're aligned together, then, and we're walking in the same path, then shoot. I mean, what can I say about that? That's a good thing.
That's a really good thing.
It's a good thing for sure.
So I hope that makes sense to the listeners. Now that I think about it, I wish that I had used a different example for our incident because it's not very realistic for us.
Not
but
for us,
okay.
but maybe for somebody else. And I think people can use their imagination.
I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. Again, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please share with others. And we would love if you guys would take the time to leave us a review and send us comments about how you guys deal with conflict in your own relationship. How do you go from conflict to connection?
Yeah.
We would love to hear it.
There's a lot of things that work for people. So we'd love to hear and understand that too.
Absolutely. And if this has helped you, if any of our episodes has helped you, we'd love to hear from you too. So let us know. All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.